All right, let's break this down. The first example is about a man from the wild, a really primitive guy, who walks into this magnificent military barracks. And when it says primitive, it means this is the first time he's ever seen anything like it. He's never seen a barracks before in his life. He's a mountain man, someone who's never seen a city, doesn't know how people interact. Because he doesn't know, he can't reason about what he's seeing. This is a key part of the analogy. It relates to the person contemplating these ideas, their way of thinking and understanding things. He's completely unfamiliar with the local customs and rules. When we apply this to reality, it's like someone who doesn't know what knowledge is, what a law is. Is a law a physical thing or a concept? Is a law power? Can it be? He doesn't know these details. In fact, based on the text, he doesn't even have a concept of knowledge itself. He imagines strings. He has a very simple mind, not someone who can analyze things deeply and see all the subtleties. And honestly, that's what these guys, the atheists, are like. When you look at them, you see they're clueless about so many aspects of so many issues. That's why the text specifically uses the term a man from the wild to draw attention to this. So this primitive guy walks into a magnificent, grand military barracks. And what does he see? He sees an incredibly disciplined army drilling together, moving in perfect unison. With a single soldier's movement, an entire battalion, a regiment, a whole division gets up, sits down, marches, and fires on a single command. That's what he observes. And it's the same thing when we look at a human body or a single cell. We see the same thing, a magnificent structure, and inside, all these countless particles are moving in perfect order, together. You see the exact same thing whether you look at an atom, a cell, or a person. So he observes all this. But his crude, primitive mind can't grasp the idea of a commander operating under the regulations of the state and the laws of the king. And because he denies that possibility, what does he do? He imagines that all the soldiers must be tied together with strings. The text adds the word crude to primitive. What does crude mean? It means he can't see the fine details. It's like when your eyesight gets a little blurry and you can't make out the small things. His mind is like that. It can't perceive the subtleties. He doesn't understand that there are state regulations and the king's law. For example, how are those military drills determined? When I was in the army, we had 10 drills without weapons and 10 with weapons. Each one consisted of 8 movements. A commander would give an order, but he wasn't just making it up. There's a pre-established system, an order, and he commands the soldiers according to that, and the soldiers act accordingly. But this man knows nothing about this. So his crude, primitive mind, unable to understand, and therefore denying the existence of a commander acting under state law, imagines that the soldiers are all connected to each other by ropes. That's where the idea of strings comes from. You see the same thing today. Scientists talk about positive and negative atoms, electrons and protons, right? And they theorize a bond between them. They say a positive charge attracts a negative one. They imagine there's some kind of attraction, a force between them. It's not a literal string, but it's still a bond, right? In chemistry, you have covalent bonds, ionic bonds, hydrogen bonds. They say there's some kind of link between the atoms. It's the same idea. Why don't things just fall apart? There must be a bond holding the atoms together. But what is this bond? Is it a physical string or something else? They'll even draw it out. In chemistry diagrams, they'll write C for carbon, draw a line, and write O for oxygen, and say, see, there's a bond. They actually draw a line. Is there really a line between atoms? Of course not. but they draw it. Or they'll say a proton has a positive charge and an electron has a negative charge. What is this charge? What is being charged? Is it like an apple or a pear? What does it mean for something to have a positive charge? Is it a physical thing or a conceptual one? It's just a label. The author says they just give a name to something they don't understand and say, there, we've solved it. They say, positive attracts negative. But that's just a ruling, a decree from God. And they present this decree as if it were the ruler itself. They mistake the law for the power. That's the huge problem. You see, in the previous points, he refuted the idea that external causes could create things, and then he refuted the idea that things could create themselves. Now he's addressing the atoms that make up a thing. Can atoms do this? No, they are mindless and unconscious, as was established before. So what's left? The laws. At the very beginning, he mentioned 4 possibilities: creation by causes, self-creation, the dictates of nature, or the power of a necessary being. When you ask how the first living thing came to be, they say environmental conditions, air, water, sun, soil. But the author says these are mindless, unconscious causes. They can't create a living being. Then if you say the atoms within the being did it themselves, well, they're mindless and unconscious too. So what else have people come up with? Laws. They investigate and find these patterns. They see that positive attracts negative, mass attracts mass, events that happen the same way every single time. So the man discovers a law. He says, aha, I found something else. I found a law. And then he tries to give the power of creation to the law. He can't give it to the atoms, he's past that. So he gives it to the law. As you progress through these arguments, the level of atheistic thinking gets more sophisticated. At first it's just random chance, which is the most absurd. Then it's air and water. But eventually they see there's something constant that permeates the entire universe. So, just as the primitive man in the analogy imagined a non-existent string, these people take the laws of nature, which have a conceptual existence, and treat them as if they had a physical existence and power. He imagines these soldiers are tied together by ropes, and he marvels at what incredible ropes they must be. Then he leaves the barracks and goes into a magnificent mosque, like the Hagia Sophia on a Friday. He sees the congregation of Muslims rise, bow, and prostrate themselves at the sound of one man's voice. In the barracks, there was a commander. Here, he sees an imam. The whole congregation moves with the imam, but he doesn't understand Sharia, the collection of spiritual and celestial laws, or the spiritual principles that come from the commands of the lawgiver. For instance, the way to perform the prayer is described in the Sharia. The components of each cycle are all defined. The prayer has a definition in the religion, and the lawgiver commanded it to be so. That's how they pray. Everyone knows how to pray, and they obey these spiritual principles. Because he doesn't know this, he imagines the congregation is bound by physical ropes, and that these strange ropes are enslaving them and making them move like puppets. This is exactly what physicists do. They say an atom has a nucleus with protons, which are positively charged, and electrons orbiting it, which are negatively charged. The law is that positive attracts negative. But then they say, for this attraction to work, over the distance between the proton and electron, there has to be some kind of intermediate particle. How does the attraction get from here to there? They say we haven't figured that out yet, but they guess it might be a photon. Or look at the nucleus itself. It has several protons. Since positive repels positive, they should all fly apart, but they don't. So they say there must be a strong nuclear force, a glue. But then they say for this glue to hold two particles together, there must be another particle in between to carry the force. They keep needing a physical thing to connect everything. For the gravitational pull between the sun and the earth, they say there must be an exchange particle, which they've named the graviton, to carry the effect of gravity from one to the other. They say, we haven't seen it yet, but it must be there. It's exactly like the story. They're just proposing theories, none of which are proven, and these theories have a lot of holes. It's fascinating, isn't it? And these are the latest developments. These materialists, these misguided people, sense a great manifestation of divine creativity and lordly power in the orderly transformations of atoms. But because they don't know where this manifestation comes from, and because they can't understand where the universal force that comes from God's power is being directed from, they end up imagining that matter and force are eternal, and they start attributing divine effects to atoms and their movements. Think about it. Until the 1900s, the atom was considered the smallest particle. Then they discovered the proton, electron, and neutron. By 1930, they realized the atom wasn't the smallest thing after all. Then they looked deeper and found that protons and neutrons weren't indivisible either. They were made of three smaller particles called quarks. They haven't been able to go deeper than that yet. But if the pattern holds, just as we went from atom to proton and proton to quark, tomorrow we might find something inside the quark. The author says, if you assume matter is fundamental, you could keep dividing it infinitely. But let's just stay at the level of protons, electrons, and neutrons. Let's say these are the three basic building blocks. One proton gives you hydrogen, 6 protons give you carbon, 8 give you oxygen. You get different elements just by changing the number of protons. A new creation is happening right there. 1 proton is hydrogen, 2 protons are helium. The same particle, just in different numbers, creates completely different elements. You see this incredible creativity. Then you have hydrogen and oxygen. Combine 2 hydrogen atoms with 1 oxygen atom, and you get something entirely new, water. Same ingredients, just different numbers, and a new creation emerges. Combine that water with other things, and you get larger things, like cells, DNA, and eventually a human being. So you see this act of creation at the atomic level, below it and above it. A constant fresh creation is visible everywhere. So these materialists see this. They feel this incredible display of God's creativity and power. It's like holding a mirror up to the sun. The mirror shines brightly. It reflects the sun. You have 2 choices. You can either say the mirror is just reflecting a source, the sun, and has no light of its own, or you can say the mirror itself possesses the light. If you deny the sun exists, you have to conclude the light comes from within the mirror. These people see the manifestation, the creation. But since they refuse to accept that it comes from a creator, they're forced to attribute it to matter itself. They see a force, like the attraction between positive and negative charges, but they don't know where it comes from. So they just give the power of attraction to the proton and the electron. Because they don't know where the force is directed from, they end up imagining that matter and force are eternal, and they start attributing God's work to mere atoms and their movements. The author's perspective here is brilliant. He says, just as the primitive man didn't understand the spiritual and celestial laws of Sharia, these people don't understand the spiritual laws governing the order of the universe, which stem from the wisdom of the eternal sovereign. So they imagine these spiritual laws are physical substances. They take the conceptual laws of God's dominion, the non-physical principles of his cosmic law, which exist only in knowledge, and they imagine them to be external, physical objects. They replace God's power with these laws that exist only conceptually, give them the power to create, and call them nature. They take force, which is merely a reflection of God's power, and treat it as an independent, powerful being. This is 1,000 times more primitive than the man in the story. They invent names for things to deceive people. It's a way of taking deep, important realities, slapping a label on them, and making them seem ordinary, as if they've been understood. You call it high pressure, positive charge, negative charge. Why do they invent these words? To deceive, to trick people into giving credit to matter instead of God. They see the pull between a proton and an electron. People will naturally ask, why do they attract each other? The answer should be, it is a manifestation of God's power. But to stop that, they say, let's call the proton positive and the electron negative, and then we'll say, there's a law that positive attracts negative. Then people just say, oh, okay, positive attracts negative. And just like that, God's power is hidden behind a veil. It's a deception. They just say something to explain it, so people don't say God. They give a name to some profound and important truth and make it seem commonplace, as if it were understood. They say, oh, that's just the electric force, and by doing so, they trivialize that miraculous display of power, making it seem ordinary. They hide that vast truth and its wisdom behind a simple name, and they attribute that miraculous creation to blind force, random chance, and a vague concept called nature, stooping to a level of ignorance even greater than that of the pagans of old. So, to wrap up, these so-called laws of nature are not the creator. A law is a pattern, not the painter. It's a set of rules, not the ruler. It is a created veil of glory. It cannot be the creator. It is a passive reality, not the active originator. It is a law. It has no power. It cannot be the all-powerful. It is a template, not the source. So, in the end, since creation exists, and there are only 4 possible explanations, the first 3, causes, self-creation, and nature, are impossible. This leaves only the 4th path. It proves the divinity of the one necessary being, showing that everything comes directly from his hand of power, and that the heavens and the earth are held within his grasp.